Greetings, fellow comic fans, and welcome to yet another episode of Wednesday Warriors, the show where I go through the weekly comic solicitations and pick out the books that stood out to me and feel like are most worth your money. I am your host, as always, Alex, and we've got ourselves a bit of a shorter show today, not because there aren't a lot of books to talk about, but just because I don't have a lot of time to discuss them today. I'm actually going to be prepping to go to a wedding this week, and I don't have as much time for recording, and more on that near the tail end, actually. But we'll just get right into this real quick and just rattle these off. I've got 4 books for you today. Each one looks really interesting, so we will get started with Eugenic, number 1 of 3 from Boom Studios. And this is from James Tynion IV and Eric Donovan. This premise sounds really interesting. It could potentially be horror, it could be hard sci-fi, but either way, it just looks like a really cool premise. And basically, it's the idea of a plague has been ravaging the world, and a scientist was able to find a cure to save mankind, and everything looks great at first, but when the world is rebuilding, then they realize people who took the cure are starting to have children who are not quite right and unnatural, and seems to be forever altering the way that I guess humans are going to be going forward because of that cure. Like I said, that could either be a horror premise or that could be a hard sci-fi premise, but either way, that's a different way of approaching a post-apocalyptic scenario where humanity's able to rebuild but still has some clear consequences to those actions. As far as the creative team goes, I'm not as familiar with the artist Eric Donovan. The cover looks really good. Make sure to flip through that because I can't really speak for the artist themselves. But James Tynion IV, from what little I've read of him, seems to be a pretty good writer, so possibly this could be a breakout book from him because this looks like just a really interesting premise. Now, to be mindful, the price tag is going to be a little higher on this one. It is going for $5.99, though it is only going to be a 3-issue series, so I imagine it's going to be a pretty packed book. So just make sure to flip through it to make sure you want to drop $6 on that, but this looks to be a pretty interesting premise. Now for DC, we have Supergirl by Peter David, Book 3, written by Peter David, of course, and with art by Leard Kirk. That may be an abbreviated name. I'm not sure if the solicitation site may be off on that, so just to hedge my bets, you may want to just double check, but I'm just kind of pronouncing that as best I can. Anyway, this is obviously Volume 3 of Peter David's run. It's collecting Supergirl issues 21 through 31, Supergirl 1 million, and Resurrection Man 16 through 17. Personally, I haven't read any of Peter David's Supergirl run yet, but what I can say is that Peter David is one of my favorite writers, and I trust him to tell an amazing story, because he is one of the best superhero writers around, in my opinion, and is easily one of the most underrated superhero writers working today. And especially when it comes down to the late 80s and early 90s, he was on a tear when it came down to quality between his X-Factor work, his Incredible Hulk work, and now his Supergirl work. So, yeah, it's going for $29.99 for that many issues. That's a good deal. So if you've been reading Supergirl, yeah, feel free to pick that up. If you weren't aware of this, then feel free to check out Volume 1 and work your way up to this. After that, we've got ourselves Catalyst Prime Astonisher, written by Alex DeCampi, and art by Pop Mahan. Though I may be mispronouncing that name for the artist, so I do apologize if I did so. Once again, this is a Catalyst Prime book, and I've been really into this universe so far, so I'm, of course, going to recommend the newest startup book to their line. The premise for this one sounds a little bit more bizarre than some of the other Catalyst Prime books, so this one could be an interesting read. Looks like it is about Magnus Adatarn. He was the heir to the satellite corporation that tried to save the world with the one-man spaceship from the Free Comic Book Day special. And when it failed, he ended up a broken man and with PTSD and was considered to be a celebrity joke. But he finds out he has the power to travel inside the mind of other superpowered people, and he discovers nightmares that could potentially threaten the entire human race. That's the solicitation as it's read in here. That sounds like a really bizarre premise, but that could prove to be a really interesting comic. I don't have much else to add on to that other than Catalyst Prime's track record has been golden so far, so I would definitely recommend checking this one out. It's going for $3.99 as usual, but the way the Catalyst Prime's been packing their books, you get more than your money's worth. Finally, we have Marvel rounding this out with Punisher Platoon, issue 1 of 6, written by Garth Ennis and art by Goran Parlov. And this is a book I've been looking forward to since it was announced. The premise for this book centers around Frank Castle's time in Vietnam and the stories of war that turned him into the decorated war hero that he became. And it looks like the first issue centers around his first command and his first kill. So that's all some really interesting stuff. I'm sure we'll get plenty of allusions to the Punisher throughout this story. But, even without it, if you've read Fury Max from Ennis and Parlov, that was just an incredible set of war stories, which is something that Garth Ennis excels at. You add on Frank Castle, which he is the best Punisher writer around when it comes to Frank Castle, and this is going to be one hell of a comic. Absolutely pick this up and pick up Fury Max if you haven't already. This issue 1 is going for $3.99 standard price, but believe me, it's going to be more than worth it. And that wraps it up for this week. I do apologize for the shorter show. I know I certainly talked like it was a longer show, but I just didn't have quite as many books I could get into just because I knew I was going to do that. So, just a couple of things to get out of the way really quick. As of this recording, I'm going to be getting ready for my trip to Cincinnati. And as a result of that, I'm going to have to be late on my Batgirl and the Birds of Prey Volume 1 review. I forgot about the wedding when I made that announcement that was going to be coming out in a week and a half. So I do apologize for being late once again. I will get right to work on finishing that up and publishing it next week. Ideally Monday or Tuesday, but we will see what the week has ahead of me from there. But I will try and get that done as soon as possible. And as always, once again, if you like this video, feel free to like, share, and subscribe if you're looking for more comics and video games related content. And thank you once again for your time, and you have yourself a nice week.